Good evening. Many mainstream analyses of the conflict in Ukraine continue to frame Crimea as an unassailable bastion for Russian forces, a strategic stronghold capable of sustaining their war effort for years to come. However, what is being missed, and what has become starkly clear today, is that this supposedly invincible peninsula is now the scene of a very different, dark, and desperate reality. The massive Russian war machine has literally run out of fuel in Crimea. From the Kerch Bridge to the peninsula's interior, and extending all the way to southern Ukraine, the same critical picture repeats itself along the entire corridor. Russian army tanks, armored vehicles, infantry, and naval units are in a state of no oil left shock. The units that form the backbone of the southern front and the Kerch line, President Putin's forces, are being shaken by a profound fuel crisis that has erupted across Crimea. The tanks of the elite brigades attached to the 49th Combined Arms Army and the 22nd Army Corps are now completely motionless in the field. This immediate and widespread immobilization of elite armored units due to fuel shortages represents an extraordinary operational failure, rarely seen on this scale in modern conventional warfare. Historically, such a complete logistical breakdown typically precedes a full-scale rout rather than occurring mid-campaign, suggesting a profound vulnerability in Russia's supply chain. This fuel blockade is not limited to the peninsula and southern Ukraine. It is rapidly strangling all Russian military logistics arteries on the eastern front lines like a poisonous vine. For the armored personnel carriers with silent engines and the helpless infantrymen waiting for orders in muddy trenches, those much-vaunted grand offensive plans may now be nothing more than fantasies. The major military strategies that were worked on for months are shattering into pieces against the cold reality of the front, reduced to depending on a single drop of diesel. Because in the last few days, an incredible chain of events has unfolded in the region. The successive explosions that lit up the dark waters of the Black Sea, along with Ukrainian unmanned vehicles striking massive oil facilities and storage areas like TuPS, ignited the fuse of this critical fuel crisis. In addition, the repeated sinking of giant tankers belonging to Russia's shadow fleet at port entrances has drowned the last hopes of the Russian soldiers on the front in the waters of the Black Sea. With the elimination of Russian FSB vessels guarding the Kerch Bridge by Ukraine, President Putin's Crimea-centered invasion plans have now slammed hard into a solid defensive wall. All these developments clearly show how the Russian army is trapped between Crimea and southern Ukraine, and how President Putin's energy bridge on this line has been destroyed. But behind the scenes for President Putin, the full collapse scenario in Crimea has truly begun with these fuel problems. Now let us turn our eyes to the Kerch region, where the sound of gunfire never stops, especially to the tense and locked contact lines around Ola Pristan. Because the fuel crisis in Crimea has hit the Russian military group in southern Ukraine the hardest. The Russian Dnipro group, which operates here and serves as President Putin's greatest guarantee in the south, is experiencing a tragic logistical disaster that will undoubtedly go down in military history books. The brave field agents of the Ukrainian and Crimean Tatar partisan movement, Atesh, operating like an invisible army, are reporting this silent collapse behind enemy lines second by second. The intelligence shared by the agents with the center is extremely clear, and paints a picture disturbing enough to keep Russian staff officers awake at night. Russian armed forces units stationed in the Ola Pristan area have virtually frozen in place amid a severe shortage of fuel and lubricants. These events are by no means an ordinary supply delay or a simple movement problem that exists in the nature of war. This picture is the direct, calculated, and devastating result of the Ukrainian Defense Forces' precision strikes on Crimea's vital fuel infrastructure. All logistical balances on the front have been overturned overnight. The confessions of a Russian soldier from the Dnipro group, who made contact with the Atesh network at the risk of his life, provide the most concrete evidence of that suffocating helplessness on the ground. The desperate and trembling voice of the soldier heard over the radio actually sounds like the approaching death warrant for an entire army. Equipment is standing still, and armored units cannot move anywhere. Russian commanders on the front have fallen into a great panic and have ordered extremely strict rationing measures for their units. They are giving only a few drops of fuel to the steel monsters weighing tons, the vitally important tanks, just enough for them to survive and make minimal movements. To boost morale in the trenches and suppress any rebellion, they constantly tell the lie that fuel is on the way and will arrive soon. But on the ground, no one, not even the high-ranking generals giving the orders, knows when that fuel will actually come. Russian logistics officers are trying to buy time by attempting to close this huge crater with small, makeshift, and civilian-looking deliveries. Trying to secretly transport diesel to the front with minivans and commandeered civilian trucks is no different from putting a band-aid on a bleeding patient. The Atesh partisans never sleep and continue to follow the enemy step by step from the shadows. The coordinates of these new desperate logistics routes and makeshift storage areas hidden in the forests are immediately passed on to Ukrainian artillery batteries. Advances on the front have completely stopped, and the great offensive dreams built around seizing the east and south have turned into mere fairy tales. The soldiers' morale is sinking lower every day in the deafening silence of the non-working tank engines. Before the Kremlin could recover from the shock of the attacks on Crimea, it suffered another major blow in St. Petersburg. On the night of May 3rd, the Ukrainian Defense Forces struck a Russian Kerakurt-class missile ship capable of launching caliber cruise missiles during a drone attack on the port of Primorsk, inflicting heavy damage on numerous military and energy-related targets. According to a statement released by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on May 3rd, the operation resulted in damage to a Russian Kerakurt-class missile ship, a patrol boat, and a tanker belonging to Russia's so-called shadow oil fleet. President Zelensky said he was briefed on the results of the attack by Major General Yevgeny Kamar, acting head of the Ukrainian Security Service, the SBU. President Zelensky stated, "Each of these results limits Russia's war potential. I have approved the SBU's additional and entirely justified responses to Russia's attacks on our cities and villages." He added, "Russia could end this war at any moment. Prolonging the war will only lead to the expansion of our defensive operations." The attack was carried out as a joint operation involving the SBU, Unmanned Systems Forces, Special Operations Forces, Ukrainian Military Intelligence, HUR, and Border Guard units. The targeted vessel belongs to Russia's 22,800 Kerakurt-class small missile ships, primarily designed as cruise missile carriers. These ships are equipped with an 8-cell vertical launch system capable of deploying caliber cruise missiles or P-800 Onyx supersonic anti-ship missiles. Kerakurt-class ships are also equipped with a 76.2mm AK-176MA naval gun, two 30mm AK-630M close-in weapon systems, and 12.7mm machine guns. Later ships in the series are fitted with the naval Pantsir ME air defense system, and there is also the option to integrate the Tor M2KM system for additional air defense coverage. These ships have a displacement of approximately 800 tons, a length of approximately 60 meters, and a maximum speed of up to 30 knots, with an operational range of approximately 2,500 nautical miles and an endurance of up to 15 days. It was reported that, in addition to the missile ship, Ukrainian unmanned aerial vehicles struck a patrol boat and another tanker belonging to Russia's secret oil fleet, causing significant damage to the infrastructure at the oil transshipment terminal in Primorsk. Now for another major blow that fundamentally altered the course of this war. We turn our attention to the eastern Black Sea, straight to the heart of Russia, the port of Novorossiysk. Right in the center of the target screen stands the TuPS oil refinery, with its giant chimneys blackening the sky. In an incredibly short period of just 1 month, this massive industrial facility was hit with 4 coordinated drone strikes in a row. The repeated, successful targeting of a single critical oil refinery, located so deep within Russian territory, challenges conventional notions of strategic depth and air defense efficacy. Such sustained penetration by unmanned systems, leading to cumulative damage, indicates a significant shift in Ukraine's long-range strike capabilities and Russia's inability to adapt its protective measures. This huge complex, with an annual processing capacity of 12 million tons of oil, was one of the main lifelines powering the southern Russian army's tanks on the front. With every fiery blow delivered from the sky by Ukraine's unmanned systems forces, the production and processing capacity of this giant refinery is melting away a little more. The massive flames that broke out after the strikes do not go out for days, and black, poisonous smoke clouds that completely block the sun fill the sky. Just a few years ago, the area 1,500 kilometers inside from the front line was an impenetrable, peaceful, and extremely safe rear sanctuary for the Russian army. Today, those so-called safe steel shelters are blazing brightly in the darkness of the night, illuminating Ukraine's long-range and unstoppable striking power to the whole world. The reflection of these massive refinery attacks on an ordinary Russian tank crew member on the front is very clear, harsh, and deadly. Because while giant fuel tanks in TuPS turn into fireballs, the engine of a Russian tank in Hola Pristan, thousands of kilometers away, stalls helplessly at that very moment. These two major events are directly linked by invisible but steel-hard logistics chains stretching thousands of kilometers. The systematic economic and industrial destruction created in mainland Russia instantly turns into military paralysis and operational coma on the battlefield. But the incredible crisis and fuel problem shaking the Russian army is not limited to TuPS. Keeping the adrenaline at its peak, we turn our direction back to the heart of the struggling peninsula, to Crimea, because the Ukrainian military mind is not only stopping them by hitting the enemy's fuel, it is also ruthlessly aiming to leave them completely blind in death. When the dates showed the night of May 2nd, the skies of Crimea were illuminated by flames rising from the wreckage of the Iskander missiles that the Russians trusted the most as invincible. Ukrainian special forces and precision missile units caught the tactical Iskander systems, considered the Russian army's greatest threat, right as they were taking firing positions. But the real critical and strategic blow was delivered directly to the enemy's electronic brains and giant eyes. The strategic coastal radar, stationed near the village of Molochnoye in western Crimea, and the highly advanced Podlot air defense radar near Yeptoria were destroyed with pinpoint strikes. These multi-million-dollar radars were the giant electronic eyes that monitored Crimea's airspace and every millimeter of the Black Sea, never sleeping. Those giant, rotating technological eyes are now nothing but smoking piles of charred iron. Crimea's airspace, with its electronic shield completely down, has turned into an open toll road with no barriers for Ukrainian cruise missiles and kamikaze drones. The Russian Black Sea Command is now in a position where it cannot see whether the next deadly blow will come from the sky or from under the sea. Hitting the Navy was not enough. Radars were blinded, missile bases were blown up, and most importantly, ammunition depots were turned into huge craters. Russian Black Sea Fleet admirals are now confused and completely helpless about what to do and where to hide those billion-dollar ships. They are searching corner to corner for holes to protect the ships they pulled from the Black Sea to supposedly safer, distant ports. However, Ukraine's epic strikes reaching even the most protected ports of the Baltic Fleet, such as Primorsk, which were considered unreachable, created a full shockwave in the Russian general staff. On the pitch-black night of May 3rd, a giant Kerakurt-class missile ship capable of launching Kaliber cruise missiles, the pride of the Russian Navy, was hit with pinpoint accuracy in the port of Primorsk. These highly sophisticated warships were the deadliest backbone of Russia's ability to project power from sea to land and to terrorize Ukrainian cities from a distance. Ukraine's intelligence service, the SBU, and special operations forces worked with unprecedented coordination to accomplish what seemed impossible on paper perfectly on the field. In the same horrific wave of unmanned aerial vehicle attacks, a Russian patrol boat moored in the port, and most importantly, the oil transfer terminal in the area suffered very heavy structural damage. The picture is now much clearer. The Russian Navy is being hunted, step by step, like a ghost, from the foamy waters of the Black Sea to the icy ports of the Baltic Sea. Now let us focus on how this fuel crisis and logistical disaster will drag the Russian army into doom in the coming period. The next 3 to 6 months could turn into a true survival test for Russian units in Crimea and southern Ukraine. In modern war doctrine, fuel is not just a liquid that moves vehicles. It is the vital organ of the army, the soul of maneuver, and the only guarantee of survival. An army whose tanks cannot move also cannot reposition its artillery batteries. And every immobile artillery battery becomes a fixed target for Ukraine's HIMARS missiles and drones. The depletion of fuel means wounded soldiers on the front cannot be evacuated. Ammunition cannot reach the trenches, and soldiers cannot access rations. The 49th Combined Arms Army on the Kerch Line may find itself trapped in the very trenches it dug because it cannot find the fuel to retreat, even if it wants to. Moreover, when the Ukrainian army launches a possible counteroffensive at the end of summer or the beginning of autumn, it may find itself facing armored brigades that have lost maneuver capability and turned into piles of metal. The reserve units that Russia plans to shift from the south to feed its offensives in Donbass in the east will probably not be able to take even a single step out of the Crimean Peninsula due to lack of fuel. With the sea supply route via the Kerch Bridge completely closed, Russian logistics is now condemned to that thin, fragile, and Ukraine fire range land corridor passing through Zaporizhia. That land corridor is already a dead-end road, turned into a nightmare every night by Ukrainian partisans and long-range unmanned aerial vehicles. The deepening of the fuel crisis will inevitably lead to cracks in the Russian command echelon, disobedience to orders among soldiers, and regional collapses across the vast front line. On one side, there is a helpless military structure stuck in the mud of the Kerch swamp due to lack of fuel, unable to move and not listening to orders. On the other side stands a Russian Black Sea command, writhing in panic, with sunken ships at sea, blazing logistics bases on land, and blinded radars. Infantry commanders on the front are screaming over the radio to Moscow for urgent fuel and ammunition. Moscow, thousands of kilometers away, can only helplessly watch from screens the TuPS refinery burning, the billion-dollar shadow fleet being sunk, and its prestige disappearing. In short, we are watching live the harshest lesson of modern war, that it is not won merely by the number of soldiers in bloody trenches or by bigger guns, but by cleverly cutting the enemy's logistics lines. The Ukrainian army is not bleeding the giant enemy by clashing with it, but by encircling it and choking it by cutting its jugular veins one by one. Russian generals who just yesterday proudly spoke on state television about the unshakable security of the Kerch Bridge are today collecting the rusty wreckage of their elite boats sunk around the bridge's pillars. The great staff geniuses who planned glorious armored offensives in the Zaporizhia steppes and the Kerch Delta are today doing simple mathematics on how to unfairly distribute 3 liters of diesel to their frozen and frightened soldiers. In light of all of this verified data from the field, satellite images, and visual evidence, the course of the relentless war in southern Ukraine has changed fundamentally and irreversibly. The great psychological superiority and tactical initiative on the battlefield have completely and definitively slipped from the hands of that massive Russian army. This loss of initiative, driven by logistical strangulation rather than direct battlefield defeat, is a strategic turning point. It suggests that Ukraine has successfully shifted the conflict's paradigm, moving beyond attrition to systematically dismantle Russia's operational capacity and morale through asymmetric means, a departure from traditional military engagements. The Crimean Peninsula is no longer an impregnable giant military fortress for Russia. It is turned into a giant trap in which they are imprisoned, pounded every night from sea and air. A cutting-edge tank without fuel, no matter how large its barrel or how thick its armor, is nothing but a stationary metal target on the battlefield. A soldier whose logistics are cut off and who is left without ammunition is helpless against drones attacking from above. Even in the world's largest army, a multi-million-dollar air defense radar that has been blinded and hit is nothing but a meaningless pile of iron waiting to rust in the wind. In other words, the Ukrainian army has masterfully managed to turn the Black Sea in Crimea into a vast open-air prison with no exit for the Russian war machine amid impossibilities. The waters are heating up every second, and Russian supply lines are tightening like a noose around their throats a little more. As the fuel drops run out, the gears of the giant war machine may continue to stop with grinding noises, and this disaster spiral may accelerate. What remains genuinely unknown is the full extent of the internal dissent and command breakdown this crisis will trigger within the Russian military, and how quickly it might manifest into broader strategic implications.